Hey there, thanks for tuning in and welcome to another Ellipsis Drive Podcast. Here we dive into the stories of people, companies, and technologies that transform and empower spatial data-driven industries. My name is Rosalie van der Maas, and today we'll be exploring how collaborative, open source efforts in geospatial data are changing the world. To this end, I'm here with Samapriya Roy, who is founder of the awesome Google Earth Engine Community Catalog and other open source projects at his company Spatial Bytes. Sam, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Rosalie. I'm really happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. So to kick things off, let's start with an origin story. Who is Sam Roy and what motivated you to build the awesome GE community catalog to start with?
Yeah, I'm sure. I love origin stories, set up a character. For me, I think, my background is in geospatial and remote sensing for as long as I could remember. Even from undergrad, I was really excited to, look at Landsat data for the first time ever. And I think like that really changed the way in which I look at data. But I think at that point in time, Landsat had just become free. And for a lot of people who don't know, Landsat didn't used to be free for the longest period of time. Landsat had just become free, so you could explore multiple images at the same time. Of course, you were still plagued with the fact that in most places, internet speed didn't really catch up, so you would still be slowed down. And that created that sense of like, hey, I still need to access this data. I still need to learn about this technology. And then when I moved here to the US, I got access to high-speed internet. I was doing a lot of the work that I wanted to do with remote sensing data. More and more sensors has gone online by then. In that space of time, while I was working on my PhD, there was this growing need that I saw that a lot of people had, that how would you access data sets that a lot of scientists were producing? And it kind of got disconnected because they were storing them as zip files, or they were storing them in Dryads and Zenodos and Figshare of the world. Like these are, by the way, repositories that people can go and download the data. But my mind kept going back to that same story that I told you about downloading that single Landsat image, right? If you don't have the bandwidth to download that much data, if you don't have the storage capacity to store that much data, if you don't have the possibility to compute that much data, is it truly accessible? Is accessibility a thing that is happening there, right? So for me, the community catalog came as a result of this gap that I saw for scientific data. And it was easy enough to, at that point in time, Google Earth Engine was really, really new. And I said, what if there was a platform where I can attach the data to? It allows people to just log in and do browser-based remote sensing. And that was what Earth Engine provided. And that's how the community catalog got started.
So to double click on your note of like what is actually accessibility in your mind and openness in your mind, because you said, well, if all of the above is impossible, can we really say it's accessible and as such open? Like what makes something open in your mind? When is it really accessible?
Open is a great question, right? Because you can have these scenarios where the data just exists. And this is not new, right? I mean, open software has had the same discussions over and over again, like what is truly open? Because is a freeware open by default because you can't look at the source code, but you can utilize it for free, right? That might be open to a lot of people because by definition, they are able to at least utilize that software. They're able to at least play with it and do what you want with it. The challenge with geospatial data, or challenge with, I think, a lot of data is open can mean just a clause in license. Open can also mean that the company decided that they want to open up some of their data and put it in a bucket. But I think a lot of the times what gets lost in translation is that accessibility moves beyond access, right? Just because data exists somewhere doesn't mean everyone in the world can access it in the same way. Doesn't mean everyone can perform the work that they want to do on top. So there are barriers of entry at every level, whether that's internet speed, whether that's storage, whether that's compute. It feels a little disconnected from reality when we talk about access. Hey, my data exists in this bucket, versus accessibility, that hey, everyone in the world can basically click on a link and start working with it almost as though they don't have to worry about that last piece, right? So I think that's the definition in my head, but of course, I'm sure there are other definitions out there in the world.
Well, yeah, there definitely are, but it's good to have have that clarity at this point. And yeah, we definitely feel that mission here at Ellipsis Drive as well. You know, the drive to make data, especially spatial data, actually accessible, meaning usable to every downstream audience. But so this one-person project has evolved into something that is really rather widely used. At what point did you realize the community catalog was becoming a true community resource?
I think initially when the community catalog started, people would email me the data that they wanted to add to the catalog. They would literally send me an email or a LinkedIn message. I mean, I still get those, don't get me wrong. I was like, I still love those when people would like randomly send a LinkedIn tag and say like, I'm tagging you here, can you add this? But I also realized that this was powered by GitHub, and I started getting GitHub issues, which are how people actually submit data sets right now. And I started getting like about, I would say, 7 to 8 issues every week. And that number started growing really frequently. And at some point, like for the longest period of time, I wasn't really tracking any numbers of like visitors. And then we started doing that, and I started looking at the numbers, and I think it grew gradually from like maybe like 30,000 or something when it first started to 300,000 to now we have about 1.6 million to 2 million visitors every month. And the nice thing is we get visitors from around the world. So it's not just one specific country. Of course, there's like heavy use in certain countries, but we get it from around the world. But more importantly, I saw people utilizing the data and then writing their own stories. They're writing tutorials, they're teaching with this. So there are other creators out there who are utilizing the data in community catalog, writing papers, who are doing additional scientific research on top of that. So my goal of making this impactful and giving back to the community, because the community is helping me sort through these massive collection of data sets. And then I'm doing the part of like ingesting, cleaning, and making it available. And the cycle continues because then they can build on top of it. So that's when I realized that, yeah, it's a thing now.
That's really awesome. So for years now, people have been contacting you initially via like the low tech methods that are
Yeah.
still happening, as you mentioned, but you basically noticed a pivotal point where people started using the catalog the way you envisioned and sort of saw those
Hmm.
numbers grow.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's really
absolutely. And we added new features to make it so that it doesn't look and feel like the catalog went through a complete rewrite of how it visually looks and feels, at least twice. And we added new features like there is AI-enabled natural language search. There is a visualizer that allows you to visually go through the data sets if you wanted to. Search capabilities are already included in there. So I felt like making sure that the community also gets these new pieces keeps them more engaged with the catalog. And that was a good thing, I think, for the community to build around.
So you said we. Who is the we right now at Spatial Bytes?
It's really interesting. I use the word we very often whenever I say this because I feel like even though I'm doing the work of like curating the data, cleaning the data, and most of the that happens in the back end, I feel like because the community submits and helps curate, I want to give thanks to the larger community. So every time I speak about the community catalog, I like referring to we, like the bigger we, rather than saying me. Because they also take the time, even if it's like 20 seconds of the time to write that GitHub ticket, they take the time to make those selections, to create that GitHub ticket. Because as with a lot of community projects, they won't succeed if there wasn't any involvement. So I like to thank those reasons. And then there are some people who will genuinely write tutorials on top, and will help fix bugs and things like that. So thanks to the greater we.
Got it. It's credit where credit's due.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So you mentioned before something about like the impact the community catalog is making. So on that topic, do you have a particular example of a surprising or impactful use of the catalog that stuck with you over the years?
Um, I think there's a few where people found it. So, I mean, if you look at the first story of like how the catalog started, it was because Facebook at that point in time, it was still called Facebook, not Meta, had released the HRSL, which is the high resolution settlement layer data. And someone requested the data. And the story goes that I was like, okay, I'm going to do this and make this accessible. that person, I've kept in touch with that person, and that person finished their graduate degree as a result of, like not just, I'm not going to say like just because of the data that I uploaded in Earth Engine, but that played a small role, right? And a multiple of those small roles have been out there where people have thanked me even when they're meeting me in person, or they'll send a message and they'll say like, hey, they'll say something nice about the community catalog. And the one thing I really discovered fairly recently, because I wasn't really checking, was how many papers has the community catalog helped out. And if you go to the community catalog right now, there is a publication section, and you can see that there are other papers being written using the papers in the community catalog. So there's like 100 plus papers, and it's a slow moving thing, right? Because I think for a lot of people, they're discovering it fairly recently, and they're writing the papers. So I don't think there was any one moment like that where I thought that, aha, like this is going to be impactful. But I think for a lot of the times, those personal touches, every time someone reached out and said, oh, thank you for making this native land data set available because this is really helpful for me. I work with everyone from like school kids who reach out and like they have a project that they wanted to work out, to people who are basically in agencies who want certain data sets to be preserved over a period of time.
Hmm. That's very nice. It's also nice that you've reached sort of the meta state of impact where indeed papers that have been powered by the community catalog are now inspiring other papers and sort of, it goes from there into the network basically.
Exactly.
So you mentioned already that when you talk about the community catalog, you communicate in we. Has that broader we directed the development of the community catalog in any particular direction?
Oh, they do. I always tell this to when I'm sitting in a panel. I was in a panel about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago in DC, and someone asked me. People were talking about feedbacks, right? And product managers get feedback, and engineering managers sometimes get feedback. And the funny thing is, I said, well, I don't have a filtering layer. People give me very direct feedback. If they want something, if they dislike something, or if they want something, or if they really, really want something, they will send me a direct message. They will send me an email. My email is available, like because it's very visible on the GitHub projects. So they will send me a direct message. That conversation then leads to certain features or growth to happen. For example, I'll tell you that the rewrite of the community catalog to make it visually, where there's the horizontal tabs as well as the vertical panels, was because a lot of community members were like, hey, this is getting too vertical and it's getting too long. It's harder to scroll and browse and things like that. The AI button and the fact that you can now do the search was actually inspired by a hackathon that we did last year in Dublin, where a bunch of people sat around and I said, like, what would be a cool feature to add to the catalog? And at least two or three of us, we came together and said, like, what if we just add natural language search? And then I expanded it to include the main catalog as well. So now that search bot can actually search across the community catalog as well as the main catalog. So it's kind of like nice unifying project. So a lot of times people just give me direct feedback. I don't have product managers to filter my many requests that I get. Yeah.
So that hackathon you mentioned, is that part of the community catalog initiative, or did some organization pull you in? Like, I'm curious.
Yeah, this was Geo for Good. Google runs this conference called Geo for Good every year. Actually, there's one happening next week in New York. I'm going for that one. Hackathons are great because for me personally, it's a it's one of those ways in which my brain works is like get in a group, actually get your hands on, try to build something, try to do something. I mean, I would have loved to do engaging things like this as a community catalog objective, but you have to realize also that community catalog isn't really part of any funded project. There's no funding for the community catalog. There is no source of like, hey, this is where I'm going to dedicate this much amount of my fixed time. Community catalog, even today, is like things I do after my day job is over. And I'll sit in the evenings or I'll sit on the weekends and work on those. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to create that structure yet where the community catalog can run its own hackathon. But I'm really hoping that people self-arrange. And sometimes they do, sometimes they'll come and say like, hey, do you want to work on something together? And that to me becomes, like motivating.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I double clicked because I was curious whether it had actually sort of reached the in the level of self-organization where something like that would just happen.
Yeah.
Um, but on the topic of this basically being something that you do in the off hours, how do you feel about the sustainability of this towards the future? Because you mentioned that some organizations reach out saying like, hey, we would like to, keep this data for the ages, but how are the ages actually guaranteed considering the current format? Or am I not seeing something that you already are?
So first of all, we're not guaranteeing them for the ages. No one can. So I always tell people it's like, it's as free as, because I'll go to conferences and people say this website is going to be there forever. And I was like, as long as GitHub is free forever. The website is probably like hosted on GitHub or something like that. And I joke and I say, nothing is forever. No matter what people say, I don't care, diamonds and whatnot, nothing is forever. So I am not minting DOIs. I am not talking about persistence, as in Sam is going to basically, have something that's going to last 30 years. Like, for example, we don't know if platforms will last that long, right? With the way in which things are changing, maybe everything will happen on the fly. Nobody needs platforms in between anymore. Totally hypothetical scenario, by the way. But persistence in my brain means that I work with the collaborators and I also create plans with them in terms of like, hey, this is a critical data. We're not just going to keep a copy in Earth Engine. We're going to make a copy somewhere else. And that copy is going to be distributed because we want that persistence to happen. Like you said, when we started this talk, redundancy is a good thing, right? But it's a fair point about me being the only maintainer right now. That is something I'm really trying to change. The idea for me would be at some point to get funding for the project, like in an ideal world, so that I can then hire, it could be, and I really love working with students because I feel like students come with some amazing ideas. So I want this to be something that's still nonprofit. It's still, like engages with students, whether it's grad students or undergrad, who really are passionate about building things on top of this. And then I can move to the role where I'm like making like maybe some broader decisions, or I'm generating material on top, like I'm creating the AI pieces, or I'm creating tutorials and more ways for people to engage, or writing more blogs, which I absolutely love doing, and I wish I had more time to do. So that's my very naive answer, but there is ownership of the repo given to at least 2 or 3 of my colleagues. So in a scenario, you get hit by a bus scenario that, people love talking. There are people who will be able to take control of it if needed.
Okay, I understand the inheritance of this project is sort of still being shaped. Yeah,
it is, and it's hard, right? Because someone still has to commit time, and it's very hard to convince, even if it's like just with a lot of open source projects right out there. I don't take code contributions because there are no code contributions for this, right? So people are interacting with this repo the same way in which people interact with a software repo, but just rather than contributing code, they're contributing like where the data sits and curating and figuring out that, hey, in this mess of 1,000 data sets, focus on this 26 because they're very important. So I still feel that there is community engagement and involvement in the way in which it runs. But yeah, making it sustainable financially and economically viable or something like that is still taking a little bit more time than I had expected. And that's also owing to the fact that Spatial Bytes is still pretty new. I started my own company like this January. I think I did a little bit of work last year, but most of it is like still pretty new. I'm still figuring out what I need to do to make, both sides work properly. But I'm really hoping that that portion of like long-term sustainability comes via grants that we might be able to ask. In fact, a colleague of mine and I are writing our first paper for the first time. It's a commentary paper on the community catalog, which my colleague was like, why haven't you written this? And I was like, I just didn't have the time. And I'm sure you understand, like running open source is hard,
Yeah. It's so there's still an evolution there to happen. But yeah, hopefully I can imagine that it can be like the spinal cord in all your future work, so you can always draw back to this and keep the good work going. Yeah, excited to follow that. And yeah, that's definitely a journey for everyone who does open source. project, but at the end of the day, it's worth it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely is. And I know that there is so much Ellipsis Drive is also doing, right, for building these community, because, like when I joined Ellipsis Drive, I was playing around with this and I discovered the community catalog as a very natural thing. Like I didn't really read the docs. I just thought I'll jump in and I'll start doing because who needs instructions, right? You
Exactly.
know, let's just start exploring it. And I found the community catalog and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I love the fact that people are organizing and they want to share. And I think that part hasn't, like, that part is like universally there. People want to share what they think is important, what they think is relevant out there in the world. And I appreciate that company like yours, and there's other, people who want to do that kind of effort where they're like, we want to give you a space where you can make this data available
Mhm.
for everyone else to use. It's not just hey, come with us, analyze data, and you're done.
Mhm.
Um, because in an ideal world, I would love for community catalogs to exist in multiple locations. And funny enough, there is a community catalog French version
Really?
where, yeah, there was a bunch of there was at least two users who basically came to me and said, we have a lot of data sets on France. Is it okay if we create a community catalog France? And I said, absolutely. Think of this as the way I see this is, think of the Library of Congress, right? You
Mhm.
have like a library which has all books ever written, kind of an idea, right? But then local libraries require local expertise. The librarians are curating the books they want. The society is helping them do that.
Mhm.
So the catalogs in the local level could effectively be that. And wouldn't that be nice? Like to have these regional expertise, regional data sets in there. And they're having like these multiple meetings. Like imagine a fun meeting where we could have like community catalogs of the world meeting. Like I would love to do that.
I love that actually, and it's something that I think also the European Space Agency and the European Commission are pushing on national levels, where they are sort of pushing companies and governments to organize around their own, you can call them community catalogs of data
Hmm.
sets that are nationally relevant, and
Yeah.
also pushing for that to be decentralized. But then a key there is also interoperability, because
Hmm.
you want users of different community catalogs to be able to, access everything via, standards that are expected. Um, so how do you sort of see interoperability play into this? Like how can it improve the user experience
Yeah.
of those that tap into these resources?
Um, it's a very interesting and difficult question at the same time because interoperability is really a hot topic right now. Everybody wants to write the next best LinkedIn post about, hey, you should move from Kerchunk to Czar to whatever else, Iceberg or whatever, right? And I'm not downplaying those things. Those things are really important. Cloud native is going to be really, really important for a lot of good reasons, right? But I think people forget that somebody has to pay for the cloud. Sometimes people also forget the fact that Cloud Native doesn't have to be on the cloud. You can still use Cloud Native formats locally on your machine and it'll still give you some performance benefits. There are a lot of conceptions about formats, and I feel like while they're good discussions to have, sometimes I feel like people get lost in the weeds because I'll give you an example. I was training someone and we were talking about the benefits of Parquet and tabular data in Parquet. And I said, at the end of the day, how are you utilizing this data set? And he goes, well, I'm training this other 50 people who are inputting this data into Google Sheets or CSVs and things like that. And I said, so if you convert this into Parquet, what's going to be the like benefit for you? He looks at me and said, can I be honest? And I said, sure. And said, well, I'm going to convert this back into CSV because I don't have the time to train the 50 people. So I think it's a lot of like, hey, it's not so much that the companies or it can't be a top-down approach only, that adoption will happen as a result of a top-down because everyone has that fear of missing out because I was like, if you don't know Iceberg, you're left out. You're old generation GIS. I don't think that's doing anyone any benefits. But from going back to that interoperability question, right? For me, I think the answer was simple because I was attaching it to a platform. And the reason I attached it to an individual platform was because I didn't just want to give the data in a bucket and say, go at it. because I wasn't sure if people have enough compute. I didn't know what kind of resources they would have. So I attached it to a platform and with at that point in time had compute pre-built, right? But yeah, I think in the future people will start, and we're already seeing this, like universities, people who are writing papers now are at least following some best practices. And we have to start with that education, right? If you really want to change the way in which data is produced, you have to start with how people learn about data. People have to learn about data lifecycle. And we don't talk about data lifecycle. Everything from when you create data all the way till, like, hey, I am sunsetting this data set because I have to remove this. Because I ask this tough questions all the time. And I said, imagine you have 22 versions of the same data set. At what point do you start deleting because you're out of storage? And it's a hard question because for a lot of people, they want to maintain that provenance. And while provenance is important, we are continuously living in a world where we are producing more data. So storage is an actual concern. We are all concerned about the earth. We have to worry about the fact that storage is going to be of concern at some point in time. And we have to be ready to say goodbye to data at some point in time. So interoperability, I feel, will come as when adoption increases more and more and we move towards this cloud native. I have pushed a little bit towards cloud optimized geotiffs. In fact, I've written articles about like what to worry about or what to think about with cloud native geotiffs, and I've spoken to people about what really cloud native is. And I will continue doing this more and more because as we see the future, I also see the community catalog could not be hosted in Earth Engine. It could be hosted in some other platform like yours, or some other platform like a university-owned data center, or a supercomputing center or something like that. So it's a tough question. I don't have a good answer for it, but I don't think the answer is going to be just it's all about formats.
No, like I think it's we always felt at Ellipsis Drive that in a way the geospatial community was almost shooting itself in the foot with like the continuous churn out of new formats that were sort of optimized for particular situations.
Yeah.
We sort of felt like, isn't XYZ, like good old XYZ, arguably the best protocol out there? Like for a lot of people, it's difficult to create. That's also part of the reason that Ellipsis Drive sort of automated the creation of XYZ, but it's like a simple performant protocol that is like easy to use. But yeah, the world is littered with alternatives at the moment. Yeah. They can definitely be there for a good reason, but it's like a continuous evolving monster, and sometimes you may ask like what it is we're doing here.
Yeah, and you have to write the translation layers, right? Like for Ellipsis Drive, because you make data accessible in, like, it doesn't matter because the way I see your company, it's like it's so cool that you can just basically say like, hey, I have this Google Drive for geospatial data. I can just drag and drop, add in a little bit of metadata, and it's just there, right? And now I can get the output out in whatever formats I want. But someone somewhere, I'm sure your engineering team is busy looking at like, oh no, someone else wrote some other translator format that I have to now write additional piece for. So yeah, it's a lot of overhead. When I was at Planet, before, by the way, like just as a little bit of history, I used to work at Planet Labs. Then I was at Maxar for a little bit. When I was at Planet as an intern, I was in the developer relations team, and I got to interview Frank, who wrote GDAL. And one of the things I asked Frank, I said, Frank, what's the point at which you think like we have reached stable state? And Frank was like, what do you mean stable state? And I was like, well, there are so many formats in the world. Do you ever think that we'll just say that, okay, this is it, this is good enough? And he's like, yeah, I don't really know because it keeps on growing. And I see that happening, right? Because obviously GDAL has to keep up with like all of the additional things that are coming out. And I love that, by the way, the new rewrite of GDAL is like absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. I'm sure you have. Um, but it's also one of those questions where we ask ourselves, like, are we bloating it, right? Are we bloating that whole discussion around what is geospatial? And also, are we justified in almost like format shaming? Like I don't want to call it format shaming, but that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're format shaming people into saying like, oh, look at your non-cloud native format. We don't want that. We want something that looks slicker and cooler, can be loaded in browser because that's it. That's the fundamental place I want to visualize data. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. We are definitely like the grander we are definitely format shaming. Like it's usually seen as this marker where you can sort of see like what age a company was founded in and then whether they've done
Yeah.
any recent migrations. But from the Ellipsis Drive perspective, it's sort of part of the service. Like we want people to be able to stop worrying about it, to stop worrying about what format they store stuff in, what format they like to consume data in, that you sort of guarantee that stable foundation of,
Yeah.
toss in whatever, use it however you like, and we take care of the rest. Because yeah, for a lot of people, those protocols and formats are bloated, and then for others they're not because they're at the same time designed for a reason. But like I think the diversity of use cases for geospatial data is so diverse and ever growing that
Hmm.
if I were Frank, I would say, well, never. We would never end, or we would never reach the end of, the evolution of this particular topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, that gets pretty philosophical. Also, your note on like when do we feel comfortable around sunsetting data because we know at
Yeah.
some point you're gonna have to.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's very interesting. You also mentioned like platforms a few times,
Yeah.
and you make use of them yourselves. You see the utility left and right. Is there something that if you had a magic wand that you could wave it around, that you would change to make them more usable and yeah, sort of create a better experience for people using also open source geospatial data?
Sure. I mean, honestly, if I had a magic wand, I'd say, oh yeah, from now on, all your compute is free. Then we would solve all the problems everywhere in the world because it's not really. I mean, like this is wishful thinking. Like I wish all compute was free. But if you go down to even more grassroots, right? The world isn't as connected as we think it is. Like we just assume because sometimes we have broadband internet and we're recording this virtually, we think that everyone will be able to do a full HD stream. I don't think so. And we live in this disconnected world, and sometimes to serve these people and pieces of this disconnected world, we have to adapt and say legacy or whatever we choose to call legacy, because I don't like the word legacy sometimes because they're just a different format. It doesn't mean that it's like, somehow it's like this is the date in which this is format is like, no, no, you will call this legacy from this date onwards. The older formats will still be viable and useful to a lot of people. In an ideal world, I wish that there was platforms like that where, and maybe this will come out, right? Maybe like EU or someone actually, and I'm pretty sure actually EU did invest in programs like this where you could analyze Copernicus data in a compute. And I believe if you were students or professors, you didn't have to pay
Mhm.
because EU was spinning up like the compute for them. And NASA has something similar, by the way. NASA used to have this multi-emission analysis platform called MAP, where you can go in and take compute spaces. It's harder for me to think of this one global solution that fits all. But on a regional level, I think it has to be, if we truly want it to be open source, we have to continue iterating towards a world where we think about what does open source really mean for people, where they're going to run the compute once they have reached a certain point. But yeah, that's what I would change. But from the platform point of view, like I think a lot of platforms are finally realizing that they're moving away from just data storage to like data analysis, right? You have the future where I'm hoping everybody wants to build, and I love this because uh, whoever coined that MCP servers are like the USB-Cs was truly like, okay, they wanted to start a conversation. And I was like, this is great. Because if in the US, iPhones still use Lightning charge. That's a whole other conversation. But it's still hilarious to me, but it's also in a good way. Because I feel like we might be seeing a world where if we do have like sources like yours, right? Let's say that Ellipsis Drive has an MCP server, and then you can use natural language to talk to the MCP server and say, I don't really care if the data is in shapefile. I want the data to be in a columnar table format, and Ellipsis acts as the translation layer, does something to the data so that now you're able to interact with the data. So I think platforms are organically moving in that direction because most geospatial data, just like most data in the world, is still unstructured and is still buried in a lot of older formats. Um, so that's the changes I would bring, is like having this discussion. And this is like not directed at anyone specific, but I would say please start bottom up. Don't do top down. A lot of companies build platforms because they have this top down vision of what they think is going to be the geospatial solution. And oftentimes not, people are like, yeah, but I don't really need that feature. I wanted this other thing. Please listen to the people. I was like, more often than not, I was like, it's a constant thing between developer relations and product managers. Listen
As the
to
guy who
people.
doesn't have a product manager.
I know. I used to be a product manager, so I know the struggle, and I used to be a developer relations, so I know the struggle that happens between the two teams, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the European initiative is called, like, it's under an umbrella name of the Network of Resources right now, by the way, which is a great network of various resources, as the name would suggest, that includes cloud compute, but also a lot of businesses and companies that offer platforms, that
very
offer
nice.
data, that offer analytics services, that can all basically join, and then you can write, and that's a bit of an administrative burden, but then you get to use stuff for free, especially if you're from academics.
Got
Um,
it.
yeah, you
Is
need
that your pitch for me to move to Europe? Is that what you're telling me, that I should move to Europe?
just a suggestion. Um,
Sure.
but it is quite nice, and it's yeah, there's a bit of overhead of people needing to submit what they're
hmm
looking to do, but I think it's a good step in the right direction that sort of follows your general line of thinking here. Um,
Absolutely. And I think that's so great, right? Because you're going to see more and more missions that's going to produce more and more data. If people have a way to actually, I mean, even if it's a little bit of an administrative burden, but you fill out a form and you wait a week and then you get access to compute, that's powerful as a student, but that's also powerful because you're learning that skill as you go into the future, right? Um, and I think like some of these support systems don't exist worldwide. I really wish there was this global way of doing things. Um, I wish the EU system could be replicated here in the US. I mean, NASA does, like I said, NASA does have some pieces that are very similar, but not exactly. And like NASA has its own other programs that are very unique. NASA has a NASA SISDA program, but I think European Union also has something similar through which they buy like commercial data from commercial providers and make it available to researchers. I I wish that there was this kind of like almost like a larger net that was provided or that was possible through a lot of these agencies, through a lot of those governments, who basically says like, hey, we're going to extend the EU generosity outside EU, And
yeah.
I know that's difficult, right? And I could say the same for like, hey, I wish we could extend the US generosity outside the US and say anyone is welcome kind of a thing. I know it's difficult to implement.
Yeah, it's actually
Yeah.
something that I do know has like political bearings, but it's almost the same issue as you would have with the awesome Google Earth Engine community catalog, because
Yeah.
you always need to wonder, like, how do you make this a persistent thing, especially when you
Yeah.
go beyond like citizens of the European Union, even though there's
Absolutely.
definitely a push. So that too is still an evolution. Like, we're not there yet. Also with the network of resources, like many ways to properly improve on that. But the direction is hopeful.
Yeah. No, I mean, wouldn't you wish those libraries, with collections of the world existed? People could basically say, like, this is what our community thinks is important data that we should maintain and keep over a period
Yeah,
of
I mean
time.
that does bring us back to your point on having like national or regional or whatnot thematical like community
Yeah.
libraries like all over the place that you
Yeah.
can easily connect to. Like, yes, that's the world I'd like to live in for sure.
hmm
That and a number of other things, but on the topic that would definitely be advantageous.
Yeah.
And so, as we draw to a conclusion, what would you say to listeners who would want to contribute, who would want to help out, or perhaps start using the open geospatial data that is offered? What are the steps to take?
It's actually really simple. I mean, I'm going to drop the website so that we can include it in the show notes, so you can actually go to the website and link to it. The community catalog right now is consumed via a website. It's basically allows you to search for different data sets, The only requirement there is, like I said, when I started the community catalog, I wanted to attach it to a platform to make analysis simple. The only two requirements are you find the website and you register for an Earth Engine account right now. Of course, as it evolves into the future, I'm hoping that we will be able to serve this data out of different places, different locations, so that it's also accessible across different platforms. Like I did experiment recently where we made some data set available via a QGIS plugin of sorts. And it was a lot of fun because I was like, hey, I do clean the data, so I have replicate copies of most of this data, and we could push them into multiple holdings, right? Add more to the redundancy discussion. For now, yeah, just go to the website. On the right-hand side, there is a GitHub link. And if you click on the GitHub link, it'll take you to the GitHub page. Start the GitHub repo if you find the work impactful or useful for your use case, or if you just want to save it so you get notifications on any new updates as we push new data sets. There's a blog I write called datacommons.substack. You can follow that blog. Sometimes when I find time in between, I try to write fun blogs about the data sets that are in the catalog. And yeah, however else you want to contribute, whether it's financially, whether you want to sponsor the project, whether you want to like, hey, Sam, I have this great idea for a nonprofit. Let's talk. Reach out to me. Or if you want to just contribute your data and say, hey, I have this great data set and I want to build on top of this, please feel free to create an issue or reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions.
Good to hear. You're someone who is apparently easily found all over the place. And yeah, maybe Ellipsis Drive can be of assistance in creating more redundancy for
I would love that.
the
Yeah.
catalog. That's something that we could donate. With that, our time is up, unfortunately. So Sam, thank you so much for sharing your story today. As Sam mentioned, we'll make sure that the links that were talked about just now will be available in the description, so you can find the resources you're looking for, reach out and get connected. Thanks for being
Thanks for having me.
and until the next one. Cheers.